Jiwoo woke up early in the morning, as she always did. The alarm on her wall made a soft beeping sound, and she opened her eyes slowly. Outside her small window, she could see the stars moving past the ship. The Meridian Star was a big and powerful ship that traveled through space, carrying both humans and Krell crew members. Jiwoo was the captain of this ship, and she had many responsibilities. But right now, she only wanted one thing: a hot cup of coffee. This was her favorite time of the day, before all the meetings and problems started. She liked to sit quietly in her room and drink her coffee while looking out at the stars. She got out of bed and walked to her small kitchen area. She had brought real coffee from Earth, and it was very hard to find in space. Other people on the ship thought she was crazy for keeping something so special, but Jiwoo did not care. Coffee was important to her. It helped her think clearly and feel ready to face a new day. Jiwoo filled her coffee machine with water and added the ground coffee beans. The machine started to work, and soon the smell of fresh coffee filled her small room. She smiled. This smell was one of the best things in the universe. She sat down in her chair and waited for the coffee to be ready. While she waited, she thought about the day ahead. There were meetings with the Krell commanders. The Krell were a dangerous species. They were large, strong, and they had sharp teeth and claws. They were natural hunters and warriors. Many years ago, humans and Krell had almost destroyed each other in a big war. But now, they were trying to live together on the same ship and work as one team. This was difficult. Humans and Krell thought very differently. Krell respected strength and power. They showed their respect by testing each other and by proving they were strong. Humans liked to follow rules and work together in a peaceful way. Sometimes these two ways of thinking caused problems on the Meridian Star. The coffee finished making, and Jiwoo poured it into her favorite cup. The cup was blue and it was made from real ceramic. She held it in both hands and took a long drink. The hot coffee tasted wonderful. She closed her eyes and enjoyed the moment. Suddenly, there was a noise at her door. It sounded like something had broken. Jiwoo opened her eyes and looked at the door with surprise. She had not heard anyone in the hallway. She was about to stand up when the door opened very quickly. 3 small shapes came running into her room. They were Krell cubs, young Krell who were not yet fully grown. They were about 1 meter tall, covered in dark skin that looked like scales, and they had small horns on their heads. Their eyes were bright red and very intelligent. They looked excited and hungry. When the cubs saw Jiwoo's coffee, they made strange sounds. It was like a hiss mixed with a growl. They were interested in the coffee. They had never smelled anything like it before. The smell of coffee was new and strange to them. "Stop!" Jiwoo shouted, but the cubs did not stop. They were young and playful, and nothing could stop them now that they had found something interesting. The first cub ran right at Jiwoo's chair. It moved very fast, and Jiwoo stood up quickly to protect her coffee. But it was too late. The second cub jumped over the first one and hit Jiwoo's arm. Her coffee cup flew out of her hand and went flying through the air. The hot coffee spilled everywhere, on her clothes, on her desk, and all over the floor. The cup broke when it hit the ground. Jiwoo felt very angry. The cubs made more excited sounds and started to play with the coffee that was on the floor. They seemed to think this was fun. One of them tried to taste the spilled coffee, and it made a strange face. The coffee was too hot and too bitter for the Krell taste buds. "Get out! Get out of my room right now!" Jiwoo shouted at the cubs. She was angry and sad at the same time. Her precious coffee was gone. She had not even finished drinking it. The cubs did not understand the words, but they understood her angry voice. They made more excited sounds and started to run around the room, jumping on her bed and knocking over her things. One of them hit a light on the wall and it broke. Another one tried to jump out the window, and Jiwoo had to stop it before it crashed. Finally, after several minutes of running and jumping, the cubs got tired. They made happy sounds and ran back out of the room, leaving the door open. They went running down the hallway toward the other parts of the ship. Ji-woo stood in the middle of her room looking at the mess. She was covered in wet coffee. Her bed was messy. Her desk was destroyed. The light was broken, and her coffee was gone. She sat down slowly on her chair and took a long, deep breath. She was very tired now, and the day had not even started yet. She looked at the broken cup on the floor and felt sad. This had been a gift from her mother on Earth. It was not just a cup. It meant something to her. After a few minutes, she got up and started to clean the room. She cleaned the coffee from the floor and the furniture. She dried her clothes. She picked up the broken cup and put the pieces in a container. Even broken, she did not want to throw it away. When the room was clean again, she sat down and thought about what had just happened. The Krell cubs had come into her personal room without permission. They had broken her things. They had destroyed her morning. This was not right. Ji-woo decided that she needed to do something about this. She could not let the Krell cubs run wild around the ship. It was not safe, and it was not fair to the crew. She needed to speak to Commander Dae-jung, the second leader on the ship. Together, they could make an official complaint to the Krell leaders. She got dressed in a clean uniform and left her room. She walked through the quiet hallways of the Meridian Star toward the command center. As she walked, she was thinking about how to explain what had happened. The Krell cubs had stolen her coffee, but more than that, they had shown that there was a problem on this ship. Something had to change. Commander Dae-jung sat in the command center looking at reports on his computer screen. He had been working since early in the morning, checking the ship's systems and reading messages from different departments. His eyes were tired, but there was still much work to do. The Meridian Star was a big ship, and managing a crew of both humans and Krell was very difficult. When Ji-woo walked in, Dae-jung looked up from his work. He could see that she was upset. Her clothes were clean now, but there was still coffee stain on the bottom of her uniform. Her face looked angry and tired at the same time. "Captain, what happened?" Dae-jung asked, standing up from his chair. He had worked with Ji-woo for many years, and he could read her emotions easily. Ji-woo told him the whole story. She explained how the 3 Krell cubs had come into her room, how they had taken her coffee, and how they had broken her things. She told him about the light that was broken and the mess they had made. She also told him about the cup from her mother, which now lay broken in her room. Dae-jung listened carefully. He nodded his head and made a serious face. He understood that this was not just about coffee, this was about respect and rules. If the Krell cubs could do whatever they wanted, then soon other Krell would think they could also break the rules. "We need to file an official complaint," Dae-jung said. "This behavior cannot continue. I will submit a report to the Krell Command Center. They need to know that their young are causing problems." Ji-woo felt better knowing that something would be done. She thanked Dae-jung and left the command center. Dae-jung sat back down and started to write a formal complaint. He was very careful with his words. He did not want to sound disrespectful to the Krell, but he had to make it clear that there was a problem. Within an hour, Dae-jung had sent the complaint to Commander Kessator, who led all the Krell on the Meridian Star. Dae-jung did not know that this would cause a big problem. In the Krell section of the ship, Commander Kessator read the complaint. His face grew red with anger. The other Krell around him could see that he was very upset. Kessator was a large Krell with many scars from old fights. He was a proud warrior, and he did not like being told that the humans were complaining about his people. Kessator called a meeting with all the Krell officers. He told them about the complaint. He explained that the humans thought they were stronger than the Krell, and that they wanted the Krell to obey human rules. This was an insult to Krell honor. In Krell culture, when a young animal takes food from another animal, it shows that the young animal is strong and brave. It shows that the parents are powerful enough to allow their children to do dangerous things. When a human complained about the cubs, Kessator saw this as a challenge to his power. He thought the humans were saying his cubs were weak. Kessator made a decision. Instead of punishing the cubs, he would let them have even more freedom. This would show the humans that the Krell were strong and that they did not care about human complaints. The Krell would prove their power by letting the cubs do whatever they wanted. The next day, the 3 Krell cubs came back out of their section of the ship. But this time, they were not alone. 3 more cubs came with them, and 2 adult Krell soldiers followed them to make sure they were safe. The cubs started to explore every part of the ship. First, they went to the food storage room. They knocked over boxes of food and made a huge mess. The food was spread all over the floor. The human workers tried to stop them, but the adult Krell soldiers stood in the doorway and did nothing. The message was clear. The Krell would not stop the cubs. Then the cubs went to the engineering room. This was a very important part of the ship. The engineers worked here to keep the ship running and to fix problems. The cubs started to play with the machines and the computers. They pushed buttons and turned switches. Engineer Hanul tried to stop them, but the adult Krell soldiers blocked his way. The cubs knocked over equipment and made strange sounds as they played. One of them broke a small computer screen by hitting it with its claws. The damage was not very bad, but it could have been much worse. If one of the cubs had hit the wrong machine, it could have hurt the whole ship. News of the cubs' actions spread quickly through the ship. The crew was worried and angry. People were talking in the hallways and in the eating room. Everyone was asking the same question. What could they do about this problem? Jiwoo called another meeting with Dae-jung. They were both very upset. The complaint had not helped. It had made things worse. Now the Krell cubs were causing even more trouble, and the adult Krell soldiers were protecting them. "We cannot fight them with rules and complaints," Dae-jung said sadly. "The Krell do not think like we do. They see our complaints as weakness." Jiwoo sat in her chair and thought hard. She knew that she could not force the Krell to stop. They were too strong, and they would not listen to human authority. She needed to think of a different way. Then she had an idea. Instead of fighting against the cubs, what if she could use their interest and curiosity to help the ship? What if she could give them something to do that would keep them busy and also help the crew? She called Ha Newell, the chief engineer, to her office. Ha Newell was a smart and creative person who always thought of interesting ideas. When Jiwoo told him her thoughts, Ha Newell smiled. "I think I know what you are thinking," Ha Newell said. "What if we gave the cubs something to do that would make them feel like they were important and powerful? Something that would satisfy their curious nature?" "Yes," Jiwoo said, "exactly like that. But it would also need to help us. It would need to help the ship somehow." Ha Newell nodded slowly. He was already thinking of ideas. Engineer Hanul and Captain Jiwoo began to plan something that would change everything on the Meridian Star. Hanul spent 2 days planning with Jiwoo, Min-kyu, and Yejin. Min-kyu was the medical officer who knew a lot about how Krell bodies worked and how they thought. Yejin was a systems analyst who understood the ship's computers and machines very well. Together they came up with a clever plan. The plan was to create a series of games and puzzles throughout the engineering section of the ship. These puzzles would be interesting and challenging, just like hunting. The Krell cubs loved to test things and find how they worked. They loved to explore and discover. If the humans could create something that would give the cubs these feelings, maybe the cubs would stay busy and happy. But there was a secret part to the plan. Hanul designed each puzzle so that when the cubs tried to solve it, they would also be doing important work for the ship. The puzzles would be positioned near the machines and systems that needed checking and fixing. The cubs would not know that they were helping, but they would be doing the job anyway. Min-kyu helped think about what kinds of puzzles would interest the cubs. She said that Krell cubs loved shiny things, loud sounds, and things that moved. They also loved to push and pull things to see what happened. So the team created puzzles with lights, buttons, and moving parts. Ye-Jin wrote special computer programs that would guide the cubs through the puzzles safely. The programs would not let the cubs break anything important. If a cub pushed a button that would cause damage, the computer would make the button stop working. This way, the cubs could explore and play, but they could not hurt the ship. Hanyul built the first puzzle station near the sensor equipment. The sensors were machines that helped the ship see and understand what was happening in space around it. The sensors had not been cleaned and checked in a long time. They needed careful attention from the engineering team. Hanyul's puzzle looked like a big game. It had many different colored buttons, flashing lights, and metal pieces that moved when you pulled on them. On the outside, it looked like fun, but on the inside, the puzzle was actually a tool for cleaning and checking the sensors. When the cubs pushed the buttons and pulled the levers, they would be moving brushes and tools that cleaned the delicate sensor parts. The second puzzle was near the power conduit system. Power conduits were tubes that carried electricity through the ship, like blood vessels carry blood through a body. Sometimes, small pieces of dust and waste would get stuck in these conduits and cause problems. The conduits needed to be cleaned out. Ye-Jin designed this puzzle with lights that would turn on and off. The cubs would have to follow the lights by pushing buttons in the right order, but the lights were connected to the cleaning system. As the cubs pushed the buttons, they would be pushing air and water through the conduits, cleaning out all the dust and waste. The third puzzle was the most complex. It was designed to check the ship's computer systems and fix small problems. Hanyul made this puzzle look like a battle game. The cubs could pretend they were fighting enemies on a screen, but really, the game was checking all the computer programs and making sure they were working correctly. Min-Kyu suggested that they should place some treats near each puzzle. The Krell cubs loved to eat, and if there were treats, the cubs would come to the puzzles even more often. She gave Hanyul some special snacks that were safe for young Krell to eat. When everything was ready, Hanyul and Ye-Jin went to the Krell section of the ship. They invited the three cubs to come and see something new and interesting. The cubs were curious, and they followed the humans to the first puzzle station. When the cubs saw the flashing lights and the moving parts, they made excited sounds. Their eyes became bright and big. They wanted to touch and play with the puzzle right away. Hanyul and Ye-Jin showed them how the puzzle worked, and then they left the cubs alone to play. At first, the cubs just pushed buttons and pulled levers randomly, but soon they realized that some buttons made the lights turn on and off in special ways. They started to think about what they were doing. They tried to solve the puzzle like hunters trying to understand their prey. As the cubs played with the first puzzle, they did not know that they were cleaning the sensors. They were so busy trying to solve the puzzle that they did not notice the air and water moving through the machines around them. They did not know that each button they pushed was making the ship work better. Over the next few hours, the three cubs moved from puzzle to puzzle. They spent a long time with each one, trying different combinations and seeing what happened. They played harder than they had played with anything before. The other Krell on the ship saw the cubs playing with the puzzles and thought the cubs were doing something brave and strong. Commander Kestor watched the cubs from a distance. He saw that they were busy and happy. He did not know about the secret plan. He thought that the puzzles were something that made the cubs feel powerful and important. This made him feel proud of the cubs. After one day of playing with the puzzles, the engineering team checked the sensors, conduits, and computer systems. Everything had been cleaned and checked. The sensors were now working better than they had worked in months. The conduits were clear and clean. The computer systems were running without any problems. Hanyul looked at the results with surprise and happiness. The plan had worked even better than he had hoped. The Krell cubs had done the work of 10 human engineers in just one day. But the best part was still coming. The improved systems were working so well that the whole ship was starting to run more efficiently. The power was flowing better. The computers were faster. Everything was working together in a more perfect way. Captain Su-Jin, who was the real commanding officer above Ji-Woo, noticed that the ship's performance was getting better. She looked at the reports and saw that efficiency had increased by 8%. This was a huge change. She could not understand how this had happened. Sujin called a meeting and asked Jiwoo to explain. Jiwoo was nervous as she told the story. She explained about the puzzles and how the Krell cubs had helped clean and fix the systems without knowing it. She waited for Sujin to be angry with her for her clever trick, but Sujin was not angry. Instead, her face lit up with happiness and excitement. She saw that this was a brilliant solution to a big problem. The plan had turned a difficult situation into something that helped the whole ship. Captain Sujin was a smart leader who understood that the best solutions often came from unexpected places. She had been commanding ships for 20 years, and she had learned that sometimes you had to think in new ways to solve old problems. When Jiwoo explained the plan with the puzzles, Sujin saw an opportunity that was much bigger than just keeping the Krell cubs busy. She called a formal meeting with Commander Kessator and the other Krell leaders. The meeting room was large and official. Sujin sat at one end of a long table, and Kessator sat at the other end. Their officers sat on both sides, watching carefully to see what would happen. Sujin explained that the ship had benefited greatly from what the Krell cubs had done. She said that the cubs had shown wisdom and strength by solving the difficult puzzles. She said that having more Krell working with the puzzles would make the ship even stronger. She made an official proposal to Kessator. She suggested that the Krell cubs would be given special titles as junior systems analysts. They would have the important job of testing and maintaining the ship's systems through the puzzle games. In return, the human crew would stop complaining about the cubs causing trouble in other areas of the ship. Kessator listened carefully. He was pleased that the humans were recognizing the strength and intelligence of his young. To him, this was a great honor. The humans were finally showing respect to the Krell. He agreed to the plan immediately. He said that he would send even more young Krell to help with the puzzles and the work. Everything seemed to be working perfectly. But 3 weeks after the plan started, something unexpected happened. Engineer Teo was walking through the engineering section when he felt something strange. The lights in the hallway were flickering. The walls were shaking slightly. He heard a strange humming sound that he had never heard before. He knew something was wrong. He ran quickly to the main power control room. When he got there, his face turned white with fear. The power conduit controls were all lit up with red lights. The meters that showed how much power the ship was using were moving into the danger zone. The ship was pulling more power than it should be able to use. Teo looked around and saw the 3 Krell cubs in the power control room. They were playing with some of the switches and buttons. They had found their way into an area that was supposed to be protected and locked. Somehow, they had gotten past the security doors. "Stop! Stop right now!" Teo shouted as loudly as he could. But the cubs did not understand his words. They only knew that they had found new and interesting things to play with. They kept pushing buttons and pulling levers. The power output of the ship jumped to 150%. This was extremely dangerous. The ship was not designed to run at this level. The engines were screaming with strain. The walls were shaking harder. Alarms started to ring throughout the entire ship. Teo ran to the controls and tried to turn the power down, but the cubs kept pushing the buttons and making it go back up. He called for help, and soon Haniul arrived with security officers. They had to carefully move the cubs away from the controls without scaring them or making them angry. Finally, they got the cubs out of the power control room. The engineers worked quickly to bring the power back down to safe levels. But something amazing happened as they worked. As the engineers were fixing the systems that the cubs had changed, they noticed something strange. The power distribution was better than it had ever been before. The way the cubs had moved the switches had actually improved how the power flowed through the ship. It was like the cubs had found a way to make the system work more efficiently. The engineers kept the changes that the cubs had made. They slowly brought the power back up under control, but this time they kept the improvements. As they did this, something incredible happened. The power output climbed, but the ship stayed safe and stable. It went to 160%, then 170%, then 180%. Finally, it settled at 200%. The ship was now running at twice the power it was supposed to be able to run at. But it was running cleanly. It was running smoothly. There were no dangerous vibrations. There were no damaged systems. Everything was working perfectly. The engineering team could not believe what they were seeing. This should not be possible. The ship's designers said that the maximum safe power output was 100%. Anything higher would cause damage and failure. But here was the Meridian Star, running at 200%, and it was running better than it had ever run before. Yejin looked at all the data from the power systems. She studied the changes that the Cubs had made to the switches and connections. Slowly, she realized what had happened. The Krell Cubs had found a design flaw in the power system that the human engineers had not noticed. The original design was not as efficient as it could be. The Cubs, with their natural instincts for finding weaknesses in things, had accidentally discovered the solution. They had moved the controls in a way that fixed the flaw. Now the power system was working the way it should have worked all along. Yejin brought her findings to Hanul and Jiwoo. She explained that the Cubs had not just helped the ship, they had fundamentally changed how the ship worked. They had made it possible for the Meridian Star to be far more powerful and efficient than anyone had ever thought possible. Hanul shook his head in amazement. He realized that the Krell Cubs were not just playing. Their natural way of thinking about systems was different from how humans thought. Where humans followed rules and plans, the Krell Cubs thought like hunters. They looked for weaknesses and tested boundaries. They tried new things without fear of breaking rules. This different way of thinking had led them to discover something that would have taken human engineers years to find. The Krell had a gift for understanding how systems worked because they thought about them the way they thought about prey, looking for the weak points and the most efficient way to win. Jiwoo finally had time to sit down with a fresh cup of coffee. This time, she made sure the door was locked. Hanul brought her the coffee and smiled at her. They both looked at the power readings on her computer screen. The numbers showed 200% and climbing slightly as the engineers made final adjustments. The Meridian Star, once a ship that could barely cooperate between humans and Krell, had now become a symbol of what the two species could achieve together. And it had all started because some Krell Cubs had stolen a captain's coffee. The discovery of the ship running at 200% power spread through the Meridian Star like lightning. Everyone wanted to understand how this had happened. Engineers from every department came to the power control room to see the impossible results with their own eyes. The ship's computer systems showed numbers that seemed impossible, yet they were real and stable. Commander Daejung called an emergency meeting with all department heads. He sat at the head of a big table, and Captain Soo-jin stood next to him. They looked serious but also excited. Hanul was there, along with Min-kyu, Ye-jin, and several other senior officers. "We need to understand what happened," Soo-jin said. "And more importantly, we need to figure out how to keep this working safely. This is the biggest achievement in this ship's history, and we need to document everything." Ye-jin stood up and showed a detailed report of what the Krell Cubs had done. She displayed images and diagrams on a large screen. She showed how the Cubs had moved each switch and button. She explained the sequence of actions that had led to the power improvement. But something was very confusing. The Cubs had not followed any logical pattern. They had not used any system that humans would have designed. They had just pushed buttons and pulled levers in random ways, almost like they were playing a game. Yet somehow, this random action had revealed a solution to a problem that human engineers had never even known existed. Min-kyu, the medical officer, had a theory. She stood up and spoke to the group. "The Krell Cubs are not thinking like we think," she said. We humans make plans and follow steps. We think about problems in a logical way, but the Krell cubs think like hunters. They explore, they test, they look for weaknesses and strong points. They do not follow a plan. They follow instinct. What you are saying is that their instinct led them to the answer? Daijung asked. Yes, Minkyu said. For millions of years, the Krell evolved as hunters. Their brains are designed to find weaknesses in their prey, to understand how systems work by testing them. When the cubs played with the power controls, they were using those same instincts. They were testing the system the way a hunter tests an enemy. And they found the weakness in the design. The room became very quiet as everyone thought about what Minkyu was saying. She was right. The Krell cubs had done something that human engineering teams could not do. Not because they were smarter, but because they thought differently. They had a completely different way of seeing the world. Yejin continued her presentation. She showed that she had studied every movement the cubs had made. She had written down every button they had pressed and every lever they had pulled. Then she had created a map of all these actions. Looking at the map, she could see patterns that the cubs had not even known they were making. The cubs were testing the system in a way that covered every possible combination, Yejin explained. They were not being random, they were being thorough. They were testing the power system the same way a hunter tests the defenses of a prey animal, and eventually, their testing revealed the perfect configuration. Han Newell added his own findings. The design flaw was subtle, he said. The original builders of this ship did not realize that the power distribution could be optimized if two specific circuits were reversed. This was not something you could see by looking at the plans on paper. You had to actually test the system. You had to try different combinations. You had to think like the cubs think. The meeting went on for hours. They discussed how to keep the power at 200% without any danger. They confirmed that all safety systems were working perfectly. They made sure that the improvement would not damage the ship over time. Everything was safe and stable. By the end of the meeting, everyone understood that this was not an accident. The Krell cubs had made a real and important discovery. The ship was now far more powerful and efficient because of them. This was not luck. This was the result of the Krell way of thinking being perfectly suited to solving this particular problem. Over the next week, word of the achievement spread beyond the Meridian Star. Messages were sent to other ships in the Federation about what had happened. Scientists and engineers wanted to understand how this was possible. The news reached the highest levels of Federation command. The Federation started to ask questions. If Krell cubs could improve a human ship's performance so dramatically, what else could they do? Could adult Krell be trained to help with other problems? Could human Krell teams working together solve problems that neither species could solve alone? Captain Sujin received official orders from Federation Command. The Meridian Star was to become a research station. Scientists would come from many different places to study how humans and Krell could work together. The ship would become a demonstration of what was possible when two very different species cooperated. More young Krell arrived at the Meridian Star to participate in the new program. These cubs would work with human engineers on puzzle systems and maintenance tasks. Some of the puzzles were designed by Han Newell to clean and improve other parts of the ship. Other puzzles were created just to study how the Krell minds worked and how they thought about problems. Minkyu established a new medical and behavioral research team. She wanted to understand the Krell way of thinking more deeply. She wanted to know if all Krell thought like hunters, or if the cubs had some special gift. She wanted to learn how to help human engineers understand the Krell perspective. Yejin created computer models based on her observations of the cubs. She wrote programs that tried to understand the pattern of the cubs' thinking. She wanted to predict what kinds of problems Krell could help solve. She believed that Krell could be especially useful for finding design flaws in complex systems. The three original cubs who had stolen Jiwoo's coffee became famous throughout the ship. They were given special status and special titles. The cubs seemed to understand that they were important. They played with their puzzles with even more energy and focus than before. Jiwoo watched all of this with pride and amazement. What had started as a terrible morning, with her coffee stolen and her room destroyed, had become the beginning of something wonderful. The incident had shown that problems could be solved in creative ways. It had shown that differences between species could become strengths instead of sources of conflict. She kept her broken coffee cup on her desk as a reminder. Every time she looked at it, she thought about the cubs. She thought about how the universe sometimes worked in mysterious ways. And she thought about how a lost cup of coffee had led to one of the greatest discoveries in Federation history.